Dr. Zimbardo has really given us deep insights into the nature and causes of evil, whatever you might mean by evil, probably something different than current administration means by evil. When I was researching my book on the science of good and evil and starting off somewhat naively thinking human nature is much better than I now think it is, and particularly when I was younger in my more extreme libertarian phase, in which I had this vision of, we could all just sort of get along without government somehow and contracts, and well, what about the evildoers, the evil people? There are a handful of these psychopaths and so on. Well, we'll just put them on an island somewhere, Australia or something like that. And then I got to thinking about this when I read Alexander Solzhenitsyn's work, where he wrote, if only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being, and who is willing to destroy a piece of his own heart? Well, the man that's done more than anybody in the history of science here to illuminate how that happens, how any of us can be put under certain conditions in which the possibility of evil action happens. It is Dr. Zimbardo, whose technical research, of course, everybody in psychology knows about. If you've ever had a Psych 101 class, which virtually everybody has, you know of his famous Stanford prison experiment, which I won't tell you about because he will. But he's finally put this all into a single volume, the whole thing of his research, the technical stuff, the popular interpretation of it, how it's been used and abused over the decades, and especially his work most recently in the last few years on the whole Abu Ghraib business. The book is called The Lucifer Effect, Understanding How Good People Turn Evil. Dr. Zimbardo is a professor, actually just recently retired, like last week from Stanford University. Now he is launching on an extensive national book tour for this. By the way, as a published author myself, I'm always sensitive to the quality of the production of a book. The cover, the paper, the binding, the typography, the layout. Not everybody cares about that stuff in publishing. Some people do. This is an elegant book. It's beautifully written. It's beautifully produced. It's worth way more than, say, that other book, The Secret, which is costs just about as much and is pretty much devoid of content. The Lucifer Effect gives us some, sorry. If we only get that 2 million print run for the Lucifer Effect. You need to promise they'll make millions by reading this book. He is one of the most important social psychologists, social commentators, and scientists giving us insight into the current events and as well deep into human nature. With that, please help me welcome Dr. Philip Zimbardo.
Let me get back to the beginning. Okay. I am really excited to be here because this is the beginning of my author's tour and the very first place that I'm trying out my presentation. So I welcome feedback. I will be giving a talk at Scripps Claremont McKenna tomorrow. I'm going to be interviewed by Amy Goodman on Democracy Now! I think on Wednesday. Fresh Air with Terry Gross on Tuesday. And next week, March 29th, on the Jon Stewart Daily Show. For my students, nothing in my whole life counts more than being on his show. It's awesome, man, it's awesome. And then hopefully, and then I go to New York, and then I go to Boston, and then I go crazy. But so I'm fresh. You got me while I'm fresh. I have to say in advance that if the lecture works, hopefully it will provoke you. It will depress you because we're talking about evil, and evil is never good. And I'm going to talk about some really bad kinds of evil. But I'm going to let the sun shine in, not only from Pasadena, but at the end of the talk. Because in writing this research and doing all of the, writing this book and doing all the research about it, I became aware of one of the things that's been missing in psychology. There's no psychology of heroism. And so if I'm talking about how situations can make good people do bad, then isn't it true, it ought to be, the flip side, it ought to be that something about some situations can make ordinary people become heroes. So that's where I'm going to end, with a call to heroism from all of you. I got interested in this topic on August 28th, 2004. I was in Washington, D.C. I was the president of the Council of All Scientific Presidents, the only social science person there. And I was watching 60 Minutes, and Seymour Hersh's New York article came out. And I, like you, saw those horrific images of young men and women, American soldiers, abusing prisoners, Iraqi detainees. The images were horrible. We had never seen anything like it. Not only were they horrible, there had never been images of people abusing other people where they put themselves in the pictures. And so the question was, what were they thinking? The answer later on, I know, is they were not thinking in the usual way. But although I was horrified, and I was startled, they were not surprising to me. That what these people did was inexcusable, but it was not inexplicable. Because I had seen almost the same exact thing 35 years earlier in my Stanford prison experiment. Guards abusing prisoners, making them naked, putting bags over their heads, beginning to play sexually humiliating, sexually degrading games. Very much like it. I'm going to show you, some of the pictures were identical. And so immediately, as you remember, General Myers, the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, came on and said, don't blame the military, these are a few bad apples. And Rumsfeld came on and said, a few rogue soldiers. And Bush came on and said, we're going to get to the bottom of this, find out who those bad soldiers are. And I said, it could be that whenever I see anything like that, I practice what I call attributional charity. Before I blame people, I always say, I wonder if they were in a situation that could make me behave that way. So why don't I first begin to try to understand what was the situation they were in that could have gotten them to do that. So I always try to begin with the assumption, let's assume they were good people, corrupted by a bad situation, because that I know is what happened in the Stanford prison study, which I will describe in detail. And then if I cannot understand how a situation could corrupt them, then I'd say, well, maybe there's something pathological about the people. So I never begin with, let's blame the people, they're rogues, they're bad apples, and so forth. And in fact, when I was in Washington, one of my former students from Stanford was working for NPR, and he tracked me down. He said, hey, Dr. Z, those are the pictures exactly like in your lecture on the psychology of evil. Come down to our program. So I came down, I said, I did my little shtick, and I said, they could be bad apples. I don't know enough about them personally, but I would prefer to think that they were good apples in a bad barrel. That the bad barrel is the bad barrel of most prisons. When you put that barrel in the bad barrel of war, you have a condition that could corrupt almost everyone. And so that made, bad apple. It was a nice, nice soundbite. That's what they want. And so in the next 2 weeks, I did about 40 interviews. And while I'm doing this, I get a call from Gary Myers, who's a legal counsel for one of the soldiers. Interestingly, he was also legal counsel in the My Lai massacre case years ago. And he said, we'd like you on our defense team to defend Staff Sergeant Chip Frederick. He was the highest ranking non-commissioned officer. I didn't have the time, but I said, I will do it, because now I have to find out, what was this guy like? What was the situation like? And so I got access to all of the pictures, all of those horrific pictures, and there are more than 1,000 of them. And I also, more importantly, got access to all of the investigative reports that I think no one in the world has read but me. And I have most of them in my book, in chapter and verse, and I have actually all of the URLs where you can find the full reports. And so the reports, in fact, indict the system, and I'll describe a little bit of that later. So at that point, I switched from being a social scientist to become an investigative reporter, because I'm now going to try to find out everything there is to know about this person I'm going to defend. What kind of person was he before he got in the military? What was his family like? What was he like when he was in the military? Was he a good soldier before he got there? And then I'm going to interview him personally. I'm going to have psychologists in the Army give him a battery of psychological tests. And so when I go to his trial, I want to know everything there is to know about him, plus everything there is to know about what is this bizarre place called Abu Ghraib. So I also check with people who were in charge of the military investigation, military psychologists I know who are willing to talk off record, and then, as I said, read all of these investigative reports. So I felt really comfortable that I knew about the person and about the situation. And I'll tell you later, one of the discoveries I made that psychologists have never, ever focused on. We have never asked the question, who creates the bad situation? Psychologists have mired themselves in the debate between, is it in the person? So that's clinical psychology, that's psychiatry, that's assessment, that's motivation, that's positive psychology. And social psychologists like myself, Carol Tavris, Elliot Aronson, who will be coming here, we say, yes, of course, people are always the actors. Behavior it emanates from an actor, but you are always in a behavioral context. You are a different person if you're alone in a group. The research by Solomon Asch showed the power of conformity. You could get ordinary people to see a line this big is equal to this if everybody else says this equals that. Because you want to be part of the group. You want to be accepted, and that's more important than to be right. So we know this from a whole history of social psychological research. We've never really asked the question, who creates these situations? Again, in anticipation of foreshadowing, why didn't I ask that question when I did the Stanford Prison Experiment? When I did that study, the big conclusion is it shows how situations can corrupt good people. I never asked the question, well, what was the system that created that situation? The answer was me. I was the system. I created it, I maintained it, and then I was able to say, it's over, it's out of control, end it. And so the big question is, what was the system that created Abu Ghraib and kept it going? And that's what we're going to ask today. So my talk is about Lucifer. It's come to be one of my favorites. I've called the book The Lucifer Effect, Understanding How Good People Turn Evil. So that's the part about explicating evil. And I say over and over in the book, and I'm going to have to say it 57 times when I'm on Fox News Network next week, it does not excuse it. Understanding is not an excuse. It's a way to learn how to avoid and change bad situations rather than always focus on how to punish the people. The question about evil, what makes people go wrong, is an age-old question. Evil has somehow always been with us, certainly in the Bible since the time that Lucifer, God's favorite angel, allegedly disobeyed God. And if you remember the story, and I've gotten an expert now on that, it was that God created Adam as his perfect image and said all angels must bow down and honor Adam. Lucifer and some other angels said, doesn't make sense. We're angels, he's mortal. We were here, we are prior, we were here before him. And we refused. And God said, he wasn't brooking any disobedience. Sent Michael the archangel to say, do what I say or else. And the or else was, I'm going to create a place called hell and we're going to dump you guys there. And that's apparently what they did. So paradoxically, hell was created by God, not by the devil. The devil was just stuck there. And that's why the devil corrupted Adam through Eve. And then you know what? Lucifer was right. How could you respect somebody who could be corrupted so easily? Just with a snake coming, hey, bite the apple, no big deal. Apples are a dime a dozen. Okay. So I want to really begin with this wonderful illusion by M.C. Escher. Psychologists use this to illustrate what's called the figure-ground relationship. So focus for a minute on the white, and when you do, you see a world full of angels and little tutus with wings. So make the black the background and the white the foreground. Some of you can't do that because you're already focused on the black, but I'll make it easier. Now make the black this figure and the white the ground, and it's a world full of devils. And so the brilliant thing about Escher, he designs these things where you look at them one way, you're sure that's the way the world is, and now suddenly you see the other thing, and once you see both, you can't ever go back to your original perception. And that's what I'm hoping my book will do. But what this also tells me is the world is filled with good and evil. The world has always been filled with good and evil and will always be filled with good and evil. The Lucifer effect is really an attempt to understand the transformation of people across a certain period of time. So the Lucifer effect is the most cosmic transformation imaginable. God's favorite angel. It's not only Lucifer, but he's called the morning star, and he becomes a devil. So you cannot imagine any individual, any concept being more extreme. And so for me, that sets the context for investigating lesser character transformations of not angels, but good people, not into devils, but people who are perpetrators of evil, corrupted by powerful situational forces. Not always, sometimes, in some place, in some situations. So we want to know, what is it about those situational forces? What is it about that sometime? And what is it about those behavioral contexts? I should say in passing, in teaching psychology, I've taught psychology for 50 years. I started in 1957 at Yale, so I gave my last lecture, my 50th, my golden anniversary. And I realized what students are most interested in psychology is this. It's character transformation. They are most interested in all the topics in psychology, in abnormal psychology, because it's how could normal people go crazy? They're interested in social psychology because we demonstrate through all of our experiments how do rational people behave irrationally. How do sane people make insane decisions? And even in psychology of aging, you know, the transformation of a baby into a child, into an adolescent, into an adult, into old age. So really, the excitement in psychology is about change, and it's change in character. But psychologists have avoided big questions like, what is evil? We left that to theologians, political scientists, historians, and I want to rescue that. So a simple definition by a colleague of mine is evil is knowing better and doing worse. My definition, a psychological one, is evil is the exercise of power to intentionally harm, psychologically, hurt physically, and or destroy, mortally or spiritually. That is, to kill a person, a group, or spiritually is to kill, try to kill an ideology, try to kill a whole religion, a whole orientation. Now, evil is really a lousy word to use because no one is ever evil from their own point of view. In the same way, no one ever joins a cult. No one ever joins a cult. You join a group that promises good things, simple answers to complex questions. You join a group who's going to give you a family, they're going to cure world hunger, and suddenly you realize that was a lie. You're a beggar, you're hustling, it's a whole sham, but now you're trapped because you've given up family and friends, you're blindly obedient to this leader, and so forth. Harm, so I'm really mostly interested in this. The harm of evil really begins the first time you hear a sexist or racist joke and you laugh. Or you hear a sexist, racist joke and you say nothing. It's embarrassing. But you don't tell the cab driver, I don't want to hear that. Or you don't tell Uncle Joe, gee, you shouldn't be saying that. It's the first time a junior high school girl says, hey, the reason Sally is popular with the boys, she's really a slut. You give her a reputation she can never undo. How do you undo a negative reputation? To prove that you're not that thing? There's now a new thing called cyberbullying, where you don't bully face-to-face. You go on was it MySpace? And you put up this negative stuff about some kid. A student committed committed suicide last week. Other parents have to take their kids out of school to do homeschooling because it's so terrible. That's evil. For me, that's evil. So prejudice, discrimination, that kind of bullying, things we have taken for granted in the past, I'm going to argue that is the first step toward the evil of things like Abu Ghraib. So when I started doing this, students said, well, why are we so fascinated with evil? Nobody is really interested in good. Look at the evening news. For every story about a fireman saving a cat from a tree, there's 67 stories about terrorism and so forth. And I realize, I think, it's really about power. That what we're drawn to is the exercise of power, and it's power which illustrates that an individual or group can control or dominate people, animals, or nature, and it's especially when it's creative, when it's unique, when it's absolute and raw. We don't really care that much about the consequence, whether it was, you say, 3,000 people died in 9/11. What was amazing is to see the planes cut through the World Trade Center, it was a moment never in history that anyone thought the unimaginable, that you could take an airplane, turn it into a weapon, and destroy two 102-story buildings. Even if no one died, it would be equally fascinating. So I think this is what we have to begin to be aware of. It's that all of us are fascinated with power. Henry Kissinger, who I consider an ugly man, when he was in Washington, all of these beautiful young women were around him all the time. Some reporter said, how do you account for, she didn't say, you're an ugly guy, how do you account for all these women? He said, it's the aphrodisiac of power. This power has this sexual thing. People are attracted to people who have power. Donald Trump, who I think is an ugly person in another way in his personality, it's the point is because he's got so much money and he has the power to control people's destiny, you put up with him. So it's this issue that I want to focus on. In psychology, if you work in a mental hospital, and I stayed out of the Korean War draft, you know how old I am, by not turning in my dissertation at Yale, but working at the Veterans Hospital in West Haven for a year. And what you discover is the main thing you do is they present case reports. So somebody does a workup of a patient, and then they present. Here's the test results, here's the person. So it's the case example from which everyone is dealing with the same material, and now we're going to try to understand it. So here's the case report that I'd like to begin with. These are images of sexual and violent nature. These are from the cameras of the United States military police guards in Abu Ghraib. My term is the digitally documented depravity. Every soldier had these little cameras. They took pictures all the time of everything. Not only that, because there's no censorship, you don't have to send them to a lab. You take them, you put them on a computer, you send them out. All of these images came from the guards on the night shift in Tier 1A. We'll say, how come? Why was it on the day shift? Why was it on some other tier? And what I did is I arranged these in a dramatic sequence. I put in sound effects and movement in order to emphasize the negativity. Is it possible to dim the lights up here just for this? The overhead lights? Nobody ever did that. Okay, we won't wait. So what we're going to do is we're going to descend together down into the dungeon in Tier 1A, in the prison in Abu Ghraib in Iraq, to try to understand what was that situation like. So we start with the minor things, push-ups. We have to take a deep breath after that. And so this is Brigadier General Janis Karpinski to the left, Donald Rumsfeld coming down, and they ask the question, who is responsible for these prisoner abuses? Which are the bad apples among us? We're going to identify them and prosecute them. A recent cartoon presents another perspective, saying it's the tree calling the apple bad. And this is Lindy Eglin was the young woman with the dog leash. I frame the question differently. If you ask the who question, the answer has to be people. By framing it as what is to blame, it could be people, but also it allows us the possibility that it could be something other than people, obviously in my case, something about the situation. So I begin by saying, well, how can we understand the psychological dynamics of such transformations of human character? Now, if you assume these people were always bad, there's no transformation. They were bad before they got there, they did bad shit, and take them out, they're still bad people. That's the bad apple point of view. So the most basic way that psychology deals with this, it's the same way that religion deals with it, same way that legal system deals with it, same way psychiatry deals with it, same way traditional economics deals with these things. It's all in the person. It's a kind of essentialist perspective. Good and evil are in people. Guilt and innocence are in people. Rationality, irrationality are in people. Normality and pathology are in people. So our most of our institutions are based on this individualistic orientation, which is not shared by the rest of the world. In many other countries, it's much more collectivist. It's not the individual, it's the group. So we're going to begin by saying, well, let's try to uncover the pathologies of these guilty actors. No question they're guilty. They're in the pictures. They sign their guilt warrant in the pictures. And if that's what it is, then these are bad apples. As I said, social psychologists come along and say, maybe it's true, but let's look at the situation, the behavioral context. What were they doing? What was it like to be a guard in that setting? And so then it says, let's begin by saying these are good men and women corrupted by the behavioral context, by powerful situational forces. I'm going to tell you what those are. And we're going to call that the bad barrel. And as I said, up to now, that's where you stop. That's where psychologists stop. And in going over all these investigative reports, some of which I will share with you later, and in the Lucifer Effect, I present these in great detail in chapter 15. It's the systemic. The barrel of prison within the barrel of war. So when you say system, you mean the broader influences, political, cultural, historical, legal, economic, especially legal in this case. As you know, the Bush administration has these whole set of lawyers who create laws, who change laws, who redefine torture and things. And they create the situation and they maintain it. I'm going to call that the bad barrel makers. As a kid, like you, I was fascinated with the Robert Louis Stevens story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Because that's, in fiction, this extreme transformation. Here's the good Dr. Jekyll who invents some chemical, and he takes it himself. He is his own subject, partly because he didn't want to go through the hassle of human subjects committees. So, any of you who are researchers, you know how terrible that is, in part because of my experiment. And when he takes this chemical, what happens is he turns into this monster, Mr. Hyde, a rapist, a killer. And then when the drug wears off, he goes back to being the good Dr. Jekyll. But he's now intrigued, and he keeps doing this, going back and forth. And as a kid, I always said, what's in the bottle? What could that be? Well, Stevenson didn't know. It's just a fiction. And so the question now is, can social psychological research answer about this transformation, but without the drug? We want a drug-free America, of course, so we have a war on drugs. And maybe at the same time we can get a twofer. Maybe it could also answer how these once good Army reservists, I'm beginning with that assumption, I might be wrong, they were just playing the role of military police in a far-off land, in a far-off prison, in a very controversial war, how they were transformed. The other thing I'm going to make a point about is that most of what we do in our life is we're playing roles. And when you play it long enough, you forget that it's a role, you think it's you. So these are military Army reservists. They're not real soldiers. Nobody ever said that. They have no training. These are weekend soldiers. They get paid to go to the weekend thing, they go for the summer. None of them had any training to be in a war zone, to be in a prison in a war zone. That's number one. So it's a role exactly like the students of my experiment who are just playing a role. Okay. So let's see how we can use social psychology. The key study many of you have read about, very few people really understand fully, I have a half a chapter on it, is little Stanley Milgram raised the question, would you electrocute a stranger if Hitler asked you to? No way, not me, I'm American, I'm not a German, it's 1939. He said, well, maybe, let's put you in a situation and give you that opportunity to show that you're a good person, that you would resist a powerful authority who says, shock, 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 an innocent person. And he did this study back in the 60s at Yale University, but he never used a college student. He never used a high school student. So you read in many textbooks he did Yale students. He didn't want it to be about students. He ran 500 people from New Haven, Connecticut, ordinary people, and I'll show you why and how. And then he moved to Bridgeport, Connecticut, set up a storefront. He didn't want the authority power of Yale. So he ran 1,000 people who answered this ad in the Sunday paper. We're going to pay you $4 for an hour of your time. 1963, that's not bad. Persons needed for a study of memory. So essentially here's the ideology. Ideology is always the big lie. In social psychology, we call it the cover story. It's the big lie that once you accept that, then all the parts seem to fit together. It's like national security and so forth. We will pay 500 New Haven men to help us complete a scientific study, et cetera, and later they added women. Who does he want? Factory workers, city employees, laborers, barbers, businessmen, clerks, professional people, telephone workers, sales, ordinary people. This is the run of the mill. There's never been a study that had this kind of cross-section of population. So it's the most representative. So you go to this lab, and you're greeted by the experiment in the lab coat, and he says, we want to understand how we can help people improve their memory. He tells you why memory is important. We know from the research by B.F. Skinner and others that if you reward the right answer, people and animals learn. But there's never been a study about the judicious use of punishment for errors. So what we're going to do is one of you is going to be a teacher, one of you is going to be a learner. The teacher will give the learner something to learn, and then when the learner gets it right, you say good. He gets it wrong, you shock him. Simple. Everybody understands. So you draw straws. You are the teacher. He is the learner. Learner goes in a room inside, but we first hook him up to electric shock apparatus. And at first, he's getting it right. And then he starts dumbing down. Error, 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 error. And then you're going to shock him. How are you going to shock him? Well, it's high-tech. You have this big shock generator with 30 switches. The first switch is 15 volts. Can't even feel it. Next switch is 45, nothing. You start getting up to 100 volts, the guy starts yelling. And it gets up to 150, he's yelling more. And you're a good guy. You turn to the experiment, and what do you say? You say, sir, I don't want to hurt him. I'm not that kind of person. He says, I know. You have an oral contract. Go on. Then it gets up to 200. The guy's now screaming, I got a heart condition. You say, sir, I'm sorry. Who's going to be responsible if anything happens to him? I'll be responsible. Continue. And so all the ways you usually escape, none of it is working. And he says, you have a contract. You have to keep going. And the guy is screaming. Now it gets up to 375 volts. That's here. It said, the machine says, danger, severe shock. The end is 450, triple X, the pornography of power, okay? The ultimate. At this point, so you're here. At this point, you press the thing, the guy screams, there's a thud. Bong, silence. Hello, hello, are you all right in there? Sir, he's not responding. Shermer says, I'm sorry. Didn't I tell you the rule? Failure to respond is an error of omission, which is the same as an error of commission. Keep shocking him. Okay. Now, stop. Critical thinking exercise from my friend Diane Halpern. You're here to help somebody improve their memory. If you do that, you're going to help science. The guy inside, you have either killed or rendered unconscious. How could you be helping improve it? You can't. At that point, what happens? Everybody quits. Doesn't make sense. These are not dummies. These are 1,000 people from New Haven, Connecticut. So the question is, would anybody go to 450 volts? And that's Milgram's question. Would you electrocute a stranger? If the guy is unconscious here and you keep going, it's going to only be worse. So let's turn to judges of human nature, psychiatrists. He asked 40 psychiatrists in New Haven, individually, what % of all American citizens would go all the way to 450 volts? The answer they give is the base rate, so that anything more than what they say is a significant effect. They say only sadists would engage in sadistic behavior. 1%, they said. There's only 1% of sadists in the population. They could not be more wrong. Why? They're guilty of what we call the fundamental attribution error. Because when trying to understand behavior, almost all of us overemphasize the disposition and we minimize the situation. We do it both. We say it's in the person and we ignore the situation. So they do everything that you know. The guy in the lab coat, the rules changing, playing the role, et cetera, et cetera. And they said 1%. Well, what's the data? This is the number of subjects who stopped shocking. No one stops before 285 volts, not a single person. And this guy is screaming from here on, very strong, intense. At this point, 6 drop out, and he is dangerous, severe shock. 375, the guy screams. What is it? 2 people drop out. If you don't drop out then, 2/3 go all the way. It's not making sense. Wait a minute, what do you mean? If you don't drop out here, then you click 1, 2, here, all the way to the end. This is repeated over and over. 2/3 is the base rate. About 2/3 of all people, he did it with men, with women, go all the way in response to blind obedience to this authority, when it's not making sense. He had 1,000 people. He didn't do one study, right? Of course, in each study, he's going to vary one variable. It's called the independent variable, and see what is the effect on obedience. So I only had room for 16. He actually did 19 studies. And what this says is here's the % who administer the shock of 450 volts. Pornography of power, XXX. In study 16, it's 91%, not 60. Well, what's 16? If you see a peer administer shock, somebody like you goes all the way, he provides a model of social compliance. You go all the way. In fact, it's a rare person, only 8% resist. Suppose you see people rebel in study 5. If you first see people rebel, they provide a different kind of social model, and 90% refuse. So it says our behavior is finely tuned to what other people are doing. If they are perpetrating evil, we go along. If they are resisting evil, we resist. Most of the studies, as you see, are in the 60% range. But what this says is in each of these studies, it's almost like dialing human nature. You put one variable in, and you could wipe it out, number 1. If the guy says, shock me, I don't mind. Say, isn't that sick, man? You don't shock him. Or the authority says, the guy didn't show up, I'll be the victim. No way, I'm not going to shock an authority. I'm going to get in trouble. So what this says is, by varying one aspect of the social situation, you can change this blind obedience to authority to eliminate it or make it almost universal in this setting. Not by putting people who are better or worse. It's the same 1,000 people from New Haven, Connecticut, Bridgeport, Connecticut, and they're going all the way. The curious aside is little Stanley Milgram and I were high school classmates in James Monroe High School in the Bronx. We sat side by side. In fact, I have a website I'm going to recommend to you in a minute where I found pictures from an old yearbook. So his research is really the first powerful demonstration of situational variables that can corrupt good, ordinary people to do things they never thought they would do. Now, it doesn't mean they're evil people. They're throughout. When you run women, they're crying, they're in tears. I can't do this. It's so terrible. No way. I'm not going to hurt that person. No way. I'm not going to. I'm not that kind of person. The guy says, I know you're not that kind of person. Just press the next button, lady. Well, why? So I'm reflecting on why is it that he and I, coming from the same place, both are situationist. That is, my study, as I'll talk about in a minute, really takes it to a different level. Because I said to myself, how often are you in a situation where somebody says, do this bad thing? Not very often, other than horrible algebra teachers. But beyond that, I'm sorry for algebra teachers. Always got to be. But for me, it's that most of us lead our life in institutions. We're in schools, we're in families, we're in work settings, we're in hospitals, we're in the military. So I was interested, how do institutions shape individuals? My background as an undergraduate was in sociology, anthropology, and what they deal with is institutions. Psychologists deal with people, and almost nobody deals with the effects of institutions on people. So that's what the Stanford Prison Study we're going to get to deals with. All research is fake. That is, in all research, at the best, you want something called mundane realism, that you see some parallel. Well, yeah, in the military, officers say do this or so forth. Parents say do this thing or that thing. But you always want to say, what is the external validity of any experiment? Is there a parallel in the real world? What's the parallel with somebody forcing people to be blindly obedient to him? Well, 912 American citizens committed suicide or were murdered by who? By their family and friends in the jungles of Guyana, in South America, because of blind obedience to this guy. Who was this evil guy? He was a priest. He was a Reverend Jim Jones, the head of People's Temple of the Church of Christ's Disciples, same church that Nixon went to. On November 18, 1970, he commanded his followers to commit revolutionary suicide. We have the tape recording, and I have the site in my book, of that last hour. He tape recorded everything he did, and you can hear him persuading these people why they should take the medicine. So it's always semantic distortion. Why the medicine will help them step across to the peace of the other side. It's a revolutionary suicide like the Jews at Masada, and it won't hurt. It's cyanide. You can hear the kids in the back screaming from convulsions. Mothers, be kind to your children. Give it to your children first, and then give it to your elders, the parents, and then you take it. So mothers are killing their children, killing their parents, and then killing themselves. Okay? So is there a parallel with Stanley Milgram's study? More extreme than you'd like to believe. So what do I get from this study? It's not that it's easy to corrupt good people. It's that there were 10 messages about evil. And the important thing about seeing these messages again is not to do evil, but to understand these are techniques that people use who want to create evil, and it's only by knowing about them that you can resist. All evil begins with an ideology. An ideology is the good principle, and once you accept that, then you accept the means to the ends. In this case, we want to help science. We want to improve memory. Most fascist governments in the 60s, 70s, 80s that we supported throughout South America and Greece and other places, run by military juntas, all began with our national security is threatened by communists and socialists. And therefore, what we have to do is torture them to get the information, kill the enemy of the people, and only then we can be free. In virtually every case, these countries were supported by America. These people were trained at the College of the Americas. You always want to begin evil with a small step. Press a button, give 10 cents, sign this petition, just salute. And then you want to have successively increasing small steps. So at no point, what you're doing is really different than you just did. You're in a path. So evil is always a path. You want to start with a just authority in charge. The guy's in a lab coat, he tells you a reasonable thing. He's got the uniform on. He says, this is for your own good. We're going to help, da-da-da-da-da. And then what happens is over time, this compassionate leader changes. In the end, he's authoritarian. I don't care what you think. I don't care if the guy's dead. I don't care if you're crying. You got to do what I say. Keep going. Rules are critical. Rules are impersonal ways to control personal behavior. The rule says, see the rule? Well, you don't have rules here. The rule says no smoking. In student thing, no eating, no drinking. So suppose before we were crazed about smoking, a student lit up, or I would have to say, excuse me, could you not smoke? I have a lung problem. And suppose the guy says no. Then it's this personal thing. All I have to do is say, the rule says. And behind every rule is a cop. And so you can do whatever you want. We're calling the authorities. We're going to kick your ass. We're going to drag you out. Okay. Nothing personal. That's the key. Rules are nothing personal. It's only business. But what you want is rules that are vague. So people say, is that the rule? Yes, it's the rule. And you want them changing. So that, like in the Milgram thing, nobody ever said failure to respond is an error. The guy just made it up on the spot. What you get from Orwell is the power of words, a semantic distortion. You also get it from George Lakoff, a linguist at Berkeley. So a teacher helping is what? Is an aggressor hurting. So you're the teacher. You're helping improve his memory. How are you doing it? By shocking him to death. Wow, that's a really strange way to do it. You want to provide social models of compliance. So when the guy comes around your neighborhood and he's selling some random shitty magazines, he will often have a list of your neighbors. So look, here's your neighbors who signed up. You don't know they did. You're not going to call them, did you sign up? He has their names. Well, he just went next door, copied their name off the mailbox or whatever, and you're more likely to do it. You want to encourage verbal dissent. Yes, I understand you're a good guy. Yeah, cry, get it out, feel cathartic. Just keep pressing the button. So it's really a critical thing. You want behavioral compliance, and you allow verbal dissent. Verbal dissent is a feel-good thing. Okay? So when they're allowing verbal dissent, you have a sense, well, I'm getting through to this person. As long as you have to keep pressing the evil button, you're not getting through. And the last thing is, you make exiting difficult. This is the key to date rape. No woman dates a guy who's going to rape her. They date what? Friend, college student, somebody in their class, and suddenly the guy's all over and she's saying, no, time out, I'm not going to do it. And all the ways you usually use to get people to stop is exactly like in the Milgram study. All the ways you say, no, I don't want to go on, I'm not that kind of person, is not working. And you don't know how to exit, especially if you came from a traditional background. You don't scream, and you don't kick him in the balls and punch him in the mouth, okay? Nice women don't do that, and then you get raped. So you always have to imagine, before you go into some unusual situations, is you look for the exit sign. That's critical. Because if you don't know how to exit, you're going to be trapped. So in the Milgram study, it's both a study of obedience to authority, but it's also a study of not knowing how to exit. All the ways you usually control authority are now not working. Okay, so let's move on quickly. I'm running behind. Many of you have read William Golding's Lord of the Flies. And for me, it's only about one thing. It's about the power of anonymity and the loss of personal identity to disinhibit repressed actions, mostly violence and sexuality, and to get people to behave in any ways permissible in a new situation. So the story in the Lord of the Flies is that Christian choir boys are in a plane escaping a Holocaust in Europe. The plane crashes on a desert island. And so now you have boys without the corrupting influence of adults, without the corrupting influence of Eve, just male boys. And what happens is democracy takes over. Big boys protect little boys. In order to talk, there's a rule of law. You have to use the conch to get the floor. And everything's cool until they run out of food. And then some boys say, we're going to go hunting for food. They trap a pig, and they got a spear, and they're about to kill the pig. And you know what? They can't do it because killing is inhibited. Thou shalt not kill. These are Christian kids. And the pig runs away, and they're hungry. Then what Goulding does in chapter 6 is brilliant. He has Jack Marridew, great name, Marridew, do as he marry well, takes his clothes off and paints himself and gets the other boys to do it. Now, not only can they kill the pig, they enjoy killing the pig. Once they kill, it doesn't matter who, and now they kill the intellectual boy whose name happens to be Piggy, and the whole point is fascism takes over. Big boys dominate little boys, the rule of law goes out the window. Well, is there any experimental validity to that fictional notion? As a social psychologist, I tell my class, let's do an experiment. The experiment very simply is, on anonymity and aggression, students from NYU come to the lab. They're greeted by my assistant, Scott Frazier. And he gives them the lie, the cover story. We're interested in how people can be creative under stress. Your job is to stress them. Their job is to be creative. You're going to meet two women who are trying to be creative under stress. but we don't want you to give off nonverbal cues. So we're going to put you in a big floppy lab coat, and we're going to put a hood on. We're going to give you a number, 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's 4 of you, and you're going to be doing this in the dark. A little, look like Ku Klux Klan, you know, recruit. They have flowers. It's actually probably, it's the spring outfit of the Ku Klux Klan. And they hear a tape recording. They hear a tape recording of these 2 women. One's a nice woman, one's a kind of bitchy woman. And they're going to meet her in a minute, both of them. We give them a sample shock. They said, your job is to shock them whenever a green light goes on. The measure is not intensity. It's not how strong it is. It's how long you keep your finger down on the shock. And as long as you keep it down, she's going to be shocked. Compared to what? The other thing is, whenever somebody describes an experiment, and they describe it, you say, compared to what? There's got to be a control group or a comparison group, or it doesn't mean a thing. And it's especially important that the comparison group came from the same population and was randomly assigned by a flip of the coin before the study, because that means it's interchangeable. Anything these people could have done could be done by these people. So these are women from the same class who are randomly assigned to be individuated. The anonymity condition I'm calling de-individuated. And now, I leave the room, I go behind this one-way screen, here's the first victim. Amber light goes on, you put your finger on the button, green light goes on, there's shock in the system, and you know it because this woman is yelling and screaming and twisting and turning. And you have 20 opportunities to shock her. At the end of the 20 trials, we drag her out, bring the other woman in, you have 20 more trials. Nobody gets shocked. In the Milgram study, nobody gets shocked. Nobody gets shocked here, it's all acting. But people really believe it. So it's never been a question of, you know, are they suspicious or not? So here's the data. How long do they hold their finger down on the shock? I combined the first 10 trials and the second 10 trials. I've collapsed it across the 2 women. If you are individuated, you start at a low level and you stay there. That is, they are still compliant to authority, you might say, doing. If you are de-individuated, you start twice as high in the first trials, and over time you shock more and more and more. Nobody is telling you to do this after this experiment set up. I'm in the other room. It's not like the Milgram study, something you must go on. Once you say, I'm just creating the conditions, I'm giving them permission to shock in this particular setting, and now I'm inside. In fact, if you don't shock, what happens? You assume the other, as long as one of the 4 people is shocked, there's the stress, there's the test of creativity. This effect is a significant linear increase over time, and we get it over and over again. I redid this study with the Belgian military, with masks, instead of shock with throwing styrofoam balls. You always get the same effect, and it's the effect of power and control. It's not that you want to hurt them more and more. You press a button, and it's like they're your puppets. And they twist and they turn. You press a button. Wow, look how loud she is. And so you get into the dominance and power thing. So we never think of, there's our first American terrorist who spread fear through anonymity. Now, an anthropologist challenged me, and he said, yeah, what's the external validity of that? How often do people in hoods and a mask, hoods and a little room in NYU? He said, the big question is, let's look at warriors in different cultures who change their appearance, make themselves anonymous, versus warriors in other cultures that go to war without. And we're going to look at not how long they hold their finger down, but we're going to look at how terribly do they treat their victims. And we know warriors in some cultures, they say war is on, the shit's on, and they go to war. They don't. But in other cultures, it's like Lord of the Flies. They paint themselves, or they put on masks. And so he went to the human area files, which is files of data of as many cultures as can be found, where missionaries, psychologists, anthropologists, others put in all the data. And so he says, he found 23 cultures where there's evidence that warriors change their appearance, yes or no, and do they kill, torture, mutilate, or torture the victims? That is the ultimate response measure. Kill, torture, mutilate. It's not pressing a button. It's not, do they go to 450 volts? And he found 15 cultures that change, 8 that don't. 13 cultures that were high on killing, 10 low on killing. What happens if they don't change their appearance? They don't do nothing. Only 1 of 8 tortures, mutilate. We care about the red zone. The red zone is they change their appearance and how high are they on torture, on killing, mutilating, and torture. 12 of 13, 90%, who change their appearance, kill, torture, mutilate. Of all the people who change, of all the cultures, these not change their appearance, 80%, 12 of 15, kill, torture, mutilate. So that tells me and tells you it's cultural wisdom. All cultures want young men to go to war to kill other young men. In fact, old men want young men to go to war to kill other young men. That's what all war is about. But you only want them to do it when they're there. You don't want them to do it when they come home. So we have something called uniforms, something called military uniforms that we put it in, you're proud, you get medals and so forth. But when you're discharged, it's against the law to wear your uniform. We take it away. Because we know once you're in the uniform, we've changed your appearance, we've changed your persona, we've disguised you, we made you anonymous, we put you in a group, and you're no longer Joe Jackson. You are the soldier in Unit 102 Airborne and so forth. So, you can get good people to do evil deeds by having a powerful authority, putting people in a confining situation, giving them a rationale. You can get good people to do evil deeds by making them anonymous, by taking away their identity, de-individuating them, and putting them in a situation where they have permission by authorities to do this. Another way is you don't change the person, you just change their image of the enemy. It's called dehumanization. You think of other people as less than human. Simple, they're not kind or kin. And talking to Michael earlier, said, you know, one of the most significant contributions of evolution to human behavior is the distinction between in-group and out-group. My kind and my kin. I trust, I love, I care for, I respect, I will die for. But the reciprocal thing is the other. Not my kind, not my kin, different from me. And not only once I make that distinction, then I have to add negative attributes to them. They are inferior to us, they are insignificant, they are often dangerous. And in the extreme, they have to be we have to be segregated from them or killed. And it's easy to do that when you call them the enemy. So my colleague did this study. I'll go through it very quickly. He had groups of students from Stanford who were going to help improve the group problem solving of students from another college. You're a college student, these are other college students. And the experimenter comes in, the assistant takes your name, goes inside, and you hear over the intercom the assistant tell the experimenter, students from the other school are here, the experiment's ready to begin. That's a neutral condition. So you don't know anything about them. In another condition, where subjects are randomly assigned, you hear them say, students from the other school are here, ready to begin. To me, they seem like animals. I'm going to call that dehumanization. Oh, animals are dehumanized. But you've never met them. You know they're college students, but somebody you don't know has labeled them animals. It's like the slut there. In the third condition, they say they seem like nice guys. In the neutral so this is the mean shock you give them. This is by average across the 3 people in that group over the trials. In the neutral condition, they're leveled off here. In the dehumanized condition, you start at the same place. So if there was only one trial, that didn't make a difference. But again, you get the same effect. As they shock more and more and more and more, you get, again, a significant linear increase. The good news is when you give people a positive label, they seem like nice guys, it's better than saying nothing, because then they shock at the most minimal level. So this tells me that sticks and stones may break your bones, but names will kill you. And that's the danger of prejudice. That's the danger because with prejudice, it's always followed by discrimination. Prejudice is an attitude, a value. Discrimination is the behavior. And what that leads to is the Stanford Prison Study, which I'll go through very quickly. It combines all of these processes. De-individuation, anonymity of place. I don't have time, but I did a whole set of research on how physical places, you don't have to be in a mass, physical places, if you're in them, you feel anonymous. If you're in the South Bronx, it's different than you're in Palo Alto. So I bought cars, put them in the street in the Bronx and in Palo Alto. In the Bronx, we didn't even have our cameras set up when they started vandalizing the car. In one day, we had 23 destructive, vandalized attacks on the car. Of those, only one were by kids, all in the daytime, none at night, despite our infrared photography getting ready. Palo Alto, we left it there for a week. No one touched the car, except one day it rained. We put the car out, we took the license plate off, put the hoods up, so it's obvious. It's like ethologists call it release accused. And you see, oh, there's a dead thing. Somebody passed by, put the hood down, God forbid the motor should get wet. And worse, 3 people called the police to say an abandoned car is being stolen, because I got in the car to drive at the Stanford campus. And that is my definition of community. Community is a group of people who care about other people's property and other people's person with the reciprocal assumption that therefore you will care about them. If you don't have that, then you have a jungle. Then you have self-centered behavior, and you don't have a community. Dehumanization, role-playing, and modeling. I don't have time to get into this moral disengagement. It's a process my colleague Bandura talks about, that we're all moral. There's only sometimes we put it in neutral, when you're coasting down the hill. And at that point, you suspend your past history, and you allow yourself to be influenced by the immediate situation. We underestimate group camaraderie. Being part of the team, power differentials. All prisons are about power. Guards have power, prisons have none. The evil of inaction is a term I coined in writing The Lucifer Effect. The evil of inaction is doing nothing and tacitly giving permission to other people. Not all the guards were bad, but every bad guard looked around. There were the other guards who smiled and looked the other way. No good guard ever once intervene against a bad guard, no matter how terrible it was. I'll show you some of the terrible things. Not one good guard came in a minute late or left a minute early. Not one of them ever complained to me saying, hey, it's really out of line what these guys are doing. So it's the good guards, like the good parents, who allow the abuse of other parents in the system to go on. And the study is really about institutional power pitted against individual will to resist. What makes the study dramatic is really like a Greek drama. What happens when you put good people in an evil place? Does the goodness of the people overwhelm the place, or does the evil of the place overwhelm the people? So we put an ad in the paper, not only a Stanford paper, Palo Alto paper. College students need to study prison life, $15 a day, 1 to 2 weeks. This is August 14, 1971. We got about 100 people calling. We interviewed some we were all on the phone. We had them come down. Okay, this is out of place. So they took personality tests, interviews. We picked 24, most normal, most healthy, no history of crime, no kind of pathology. And then we flipped a coin, guard, prisoner, told the prisoners to wait at home, had the guards come and get military-style uniforms, and then the study began.
Prisoner 819 did a bad thing. Prisoner 819 did a bad thing. Prisoner 819 did a bad thing.
That's Stanford. That's paradise on the outside. He's a surprise arrest by the Palo Alto police.
Police car pulls up in front, and a cop comes to the front door and knocks and says he's looking for me. So they took me out the door. They put my hands against the car. It was a real cop car. It was a real policeman, and there were real neighbors in the street who didn't know that this was an experiment. And there was cameras all around and neighbors all around. They put me in the car. Then they drove me around Palo Alto. They took me to the police station, the basement of the police station. Then they put me in a cell. I was the first one to be picked up, so they put me in a cell, which is just like a room with a door with bars on it. You could tell it wasn't a real jail. They locked me in there in this degrading little outfit. They were taking this experiment too seriously.
This is what one of our guards looked like in a military uniform, symbols of power, billy clubs, handcuffs, whistles, and wearing silver reflecting sunglasses, an idea I got from the movie Cool Hand Luke with Paul Newman. That was to de-individuate them. We created an anonymous place. This is in the basement of the Stanford Psychology Department. Took the doors off, put up cell-like doors. We had a solitary confinement. There was a little, you see back in the corner, there's a little window from which we observed or did videos, but you couldn't tell. It was covered with theatrical scrim. When the prisoners first came down, like 8612, they went through degradation rituals, as you have in most institutions, stripping them naked. Guys always making fun of the other guys' small penises, put bags over their heads, deloused them because they were diseased. Prisoners wore smocks, women's dresses with numbers on. Instead of shaving their heads, we put nylon stocking caps, essentially to take away their individuality, to dehumanize them. Here's the art in action. There was a whole solitary confinement. And initially, it was like at Abu Ghraib. Push-ups, as you saw in the first pictures, long counts of the numbers, long rituals, learning your rules. And over time, the evil was the evil of boredom. Boredom is one of the most profound motivators of evil. You get bored. Guards worked 8-hour shifts. Prisoners lived there. So it's an 8-hour shift with nothing much to do. And over time, the guards started using the prisoners as their playthings. The prisoners rebelled on the second day, took their numbers off, took the stocking caps off, barricaded themselves in, and made the mistake of cursing the guards to their face. The guards suddenly said, "These are dangerous prisoners." And at that point, the whole thing changed. There was first physical violence, which I stopped. I was the principal investigator and also played the role mistakenly as the superintendent. So now they have prisoners clean out toilet bowls with their bare hands. They would dump their towels in nettles, and they have to spend hours picking the nettles out. Always, anything they did, stripped them naked, sexually taunted them, and then began to sexually degrade them with sexually explicit behavior. Whenever the prisoners left the yard, the guards had put hoods on. You see their feet were chained. They were waiting for parole board. So we had parole board with an ex-con as the head of the parole board, secretaries. We had visitors night. We had prison chaplain come down, public defender. We tried to create a very realistic psychology of imprisonment. The kid you just saw, he was the first one to break down in 36 hours, an emotional breakdown, out of control. And after that, these stress reactions, until 5 prisoners, nearly half. There were 3 prisoners, each of 3 cells, 3 guards on each shift. Nearly half the prisoners that we chose because they were normal and healthy were having emotional breakdowns. The study was supposed to go for 2 weeks. I had to end it after 6 days because it was out of control. I no longer could even go to sleep, fearing what the guards were going to do. We have a wonderful website, prisonexp.org. It's in 4 different languages. It has a whole slideshow. It has hundreds and hundreds of references, not only about the prison study, but about corrections. If you go to Google and just put in the word experiment, there's like 300 million hits come up. And the Stanford Prison Study is always one of the top 2 or 3. Real-world parallels. Again, that's our question. So let's compare this with this. This is Iraq, captives in bagged heads. Turns out there's shortage of paper, so now they use black sandbags. This soldier, he can't even look at it, so horrible. The sexually explicit scenes with Lindy Anglin and were reproduced in our study. There have been 12 reports about the abuses. 11 of the 12 were by generals. 1 of the 12 was by James Schlesinger, former Secretary of Defense, and this was instituted by Rumsfeld. So none of these are really, in quote, independent. The amazing thing is, why was there not one investigation by the Senate Armed Service Committee? Not one. So these are all, so you know they're all biased. And even so, look what they say. Psychologists have attempted to understand how and why individuals and groups who usually act humanely can sometimes act otherwise in certain circumstances. That's my Lucifer effect. The landmark Stanford study provides a cautionary tale for all military detention operations. But of course, the military doesn't read. So even though the study is 35 years old, they didn't know about it. In contrasting the relatively benign environment of the Stanford prison experiment, this report makes evident that, quote, in military detention operations, soldiers work under stressful combat conditions that are far from benign. This report offers a whole list of what those stresses are and the social psychological principles at work. It says, the potential for abusive treatment of detainees during the global war on terrorism was entirely predictable based on a fundamental understanding of the principles of social psychology coupled with an awareness of numerous known environmental risk factors. Findings from the field of social psychology suggest that conditions of war and the dynamics of detainee operation carry inherent risks for human mistreatment and therefore must be approached with great caution and careful planning and training. I couldn't have written it better myself. The only problem is Appendix G that nobody ever read. So in one sense, we have substituted social psychology, as we thought, as I said earlier, for Dr. Jekyll's chemicals. We've had the same effect on transforming good, ordinary people into perpetrators of evil at a given time, in a given situation. It's transient evil. It's not permanent. And so we can make that transformation without the drug, just as we said before. I've only presented, because we're limited time, a few of the studies. There's a whole literature on conformity, on dehumanization. And in my book, for the first time, I have 2 whole chapters where I say, you know, Stanford Prison Study makes this conclusion at the power of the situation. But how I make that big conclusion based on one study? I say, well, no, let me take you to the Milgram study, the Bandura study, studies on conformity, on role-playing. And so there are 2 chapters where I try to present to the general public what is the whole body of social psychological research that builds on this. So the idea is that the dialectic of human nature, of good versus evil, is really a fundamental part of human nature. It's not that we're born good and become evil, or not that we're born evil and become good, that the human mind is the most complex organ in the universe. We are born with the potential, with the plasticity to be caring or selfish, to be cruel or kind, to be destructive or compassionate, to be good or evil. Let's quickly go down to that other dungeon, come up from the Stanford dungeon, because now we know we need these analytical tools. We have to understand the person. We have to understand something about the physical place, because and we have to understand the psychological situation or the behavioral context. And then we have to say, what is the system that created that situation? So here's the guy I defended, Sergeant Chip Frederick, Army Reserve MP. He was in charge of the night shift, one of the bad apples. So we're going to say, what was he like before he went there? What was he like after he went there? What are the influences on him while he was there? I said, I take on the role of investigative reporter, find out everything I could about him, I interview his wife, his sister, and so forth. And then I become an expert witness. Of course, I give this situational view to counter the military's dispositional view. Here he is. The guy you saw, the sad thing, this is a guy who was mentally ill. He would cover himself with shit. They call him Shit Man. And Chip would roll him in dirt because they couldn't stand the smell. And there was no mental health care for any of the 1,000 prisoners or any of the soldiers there. This is this guy, he's sitting on him. So that's one of the terrible things. He was one of the people, along with that pretty woman, Sabrina, who thought up the iconic image of torture, putting fake electrodes on, and this guy thought that if his legs got weak and he fell off the box, he'd get electrocuted. The idea of the stress position on the box is part of Donald Rumsfeld 8 torture techniques that all of these people had to follow. What was he like before going down into that dungeon? He's the most patriotic American, all-American person I have ever met. This is in Kuwait. He would give people presents of the American flag. He loves the American flag. He puts it up in the morning, takes it down at night. He tears up at the Star-Spangled Banner. What is his disposition like? The clinical assessments by a clinical psychologist, I had him checked by an expert. I interviewed him at home, gave him other tests. Normal, not a single measure of any pathology. On all the measures, MMPI, Wexler Bellevue, a whole set of things. He's an all-American young man. Everything in his past is positive, indicating that he is average, prototypical small-town American, small town in Pennsylvania, Appalachia, you know, Baptist family, goes to church, you name it, plays softball. It's like a parrot. It's like Norman Rockwell. You know, here's this thing you check off, all these things. Not only he's a model, he's got 9 medals and awards. And when he goes to Kuwait, he's playing with kids. He's trying to learn Arabic. The kids love him. He's willing to die for his country. He was a guard. He had experience. He was a guard in a small prison in Virginia where he was just a guard. He wasn't in charge of anybody. And the prison had 200. He's now going to be in charge of 1,000 Iraqis, 60 Iraqi police, 1,000 detainees, 60 Iraqi police who are smuggling weapons in, 9 Army reservists, without any supervision ever. So I'm saying, for me, he's a super patriot. And he goes into that dungeon. So what is the situation like? Everything that I saw in the Stanford Prison Study is exactly the same, only to nth degree there. The worst abuses in both were only on the night shift because there was never surveillance. No senior officer ever went down to that basement in the middle of the night. And also in my study, in the middle of the night, I often went to sleep. Inhumane working. So what was his job? He worked 12 hours from 4 p.m. to 4 a.m. How many days a week? 7. How many days without a break? 40. Give him 1 day off and make him work 2 more weeks. Is there any job in the world you could imagine which is more intense? Well, that's not the worst of it. This place is under bombardment. It's filthy. There's shit going all over. Electricity goes out, so you're all in the dark. There's 1,000 prisoners. There's people coming and going, civilian contractors, military intelligence, the CIA. The place smells like a sewer. There's rats running around. And he's in charge of, as I said, 1,000, no supervision. What happens at 4 a.m.? He goes to sleep in a prison cell in a different part of the prison. That means he never leaves the prison. Robert J. Lifton, trying to understand, the psychiatrist, how American soldiers in the Korean War gave germ warfare confession after being interrogated by Chinese communists. He said anybody who's in a total situation is vulnerable to any kind of influence because in that situation, all of the information is controlled, all the rewards and punishment. So here's this guy working around halfway around the clock, days on end without a break. And when it's over, he goes to sleep in a prison cell. Lastly, 5 soldiers and 20 detainees were killed. Across the street from Abu Ghraib prison, there's a housing project, and they're firing grenades and mortars all the time. Soldiers are being killed. The British told us, don't use that. It's dangerous. But because we hadn't planned the war, we hadn't planned the exit, we said we had no choice. So really, he's exactly like one of my guards. Before going into that prison, before going into that dungeon, before our kids went down to our Stanford dungeon, normal on every dimension, we could see. What was he like afterwards? Here he is with his wife, Martha. Here he is with my San Francisco Giant cap near my home. Here he is with me. Normal. So again, it's like an ABA design. A, normal. B, you have the intervention. A, again, it's back to where it was. It's exactly what Hannah Arendt said about Eichmann, only she didn't have when she said the banality of evil, she didn't have the psychological concept. She said, before Eichmann went to Auschwitz, he was a normal. When we see him now on the stand, normal. She said the banality of evil is that he's terrifyingly normal. He looks just like us. But when he was in that situation, Auschwitz, where he had the job with his Nazi ideology, where he had to efficiently orchestrate the deaths of 20 million Jews in a short time, in that setting, he was corrupted and was a monster. So what was his military trial? 8 years in prison, dishonorable discharge. He becomes a prisoner, 798. He's stripped of his 9 medals publicly. They took away his 22 years of retirement pay. His marriage is destroyed. He has nothing. In fact, they sent him to solitary confinement. Okay? And 2 soldiers just the other day were sentenced to 3 years in prison for murdering detainees on the order of one of their captains who said, let him run and shoot him. And they shot him in the back, and the army said it was negligent homicide. And they got 3 years in prison. So clearly this guy should have served some time. My sense is there's some injustice in that. Who is responsible for maintaining these conditions? Dogs to induce fear, use of nakedness, extreme stress, sleep, food, sensory deprivation, concealing illegal practices from the Red Cross, abuses, suicides, and murders of 21 detainees in all of the prisons throughout. Not Chip Frederick and not any of the MPs. The first set of things we have documented, again in my book, these were official statements from Donald Rumsfeld that first went to Abu Ghraib, to General Miller there, and General Miller took these to Gitmo-Wise, Iraq. These were standard operating procedures from Rumsfeld, General Miller, and General Sanchez in Iraq. Just one or two more things. So, in what way is the system guilty? General Fay says, for a period of 7 months, military intelligence, so in this basement, there's military police. Their job is to protect the prisoners. Military police intelligence is to get information. And for the first time, military intelligence is getting the military police to cooperate with them to soften up the detainees. But this is, so General Fay says, the military intelligence requested, encouraged, condoned, or solicited military police personnel, my guys, to abuse detainees. Not to get information, to abuse. And they participate in detainee abuse themselves, military intelligence. And or they violated establishment interrogation procedures and applicable abuses. These abuses would not have occurred had military doctrine been followed and mission training conducted. For a period of, okay. And then he says, the environment created at Abu Ghraib contributed to the occurrence of such abuse and the fact that it remained undiscovered by higher authorities for a long period of time. This went on for 3 months. Who was watching the store? How come suddenly they say, oh my God, we didn't know this was going on. You should have known it's going on. General Fay and General Jones together said, there are 7 factors we have identified that led to the abuse. Only one of those were dispositional, the personal failures of these 7 guys. 6 of them are situational and or systemic. And they say, looking beyond personal responsibility, leader responsibility, command responsibility, systemic problems and issues also contributed to the volatile environment in which abuse occurred. When this happened, on that August 28, 2004, when General Myers, head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, got on, he said, these are bad soldiers. He said, there's no evidence it's systemic. It was a lie. And it turns out, recently, he said, well, there's what, been 12 or 13 reports, and all of them say it's just these guys. There have been 600 accusations of detainee abuse. 190 were never even investigated. 410 were investigated. 260 were cleared with no action. 150 were disciplined. Of these, 79 got court-martialed. Of the court-martial, only 54 were found guilty. 10 served a 1-year sentence. 30 served less than 1 year sentence. 14 got no prison. 10 were acquitted. 15 minor. And almost every officer gets what's known as administrative discipline, a reprimand, a letter. Okay. So the tragedy for me of Abu Ghraib is good American soldiers were corrupted by the bad barrel in which they were imprisoned in the same way as those detainees. That bad barrel is placed in the bad barrel of an immoral war. The barrels were built, maintained, justified, and mismanaged by the bad barrel makers, from the military and the civilian administration, George Tenet of the CIA, Rumsfeld, Cheney, and Bush. They are fully complicit, I'm arguing, in the torture and abuses. If all of these people, were sentenced, they were the end product. In my new website, lucifereffect.org, we have a virtual voting booth where you can go and vote for, say, how guilty, are they guilty or innocent for each of those 4 people. Navy General Counsel Alberto Mora, having discovered that one of the high-value detainees was tortured for more than a month. There was an expose, a leak in Time magazine a few months ago, tortured in the most horrendous ways. He said, if cruelty is no longer declared unlawful, but instead is applied as a matter of policy, it alters the fundamental relationship of man to government. The Constitution recognizes that man has an inherent right not bestowed by the state or laws, to personal dignity. That's the bottom line, including the right to be free of cruelty. It applies to all human beings, not just in America, even those designated as, quote, unlawful enemy combatants. So that's the Bush thing with Alberto Gonzalez and John Liu from Berkeley lawyer. If you make this exception, the whole Constitution crumbles. It's a transformative issue. It's an issue about which Americans should be outraged, and they are not. Following up, I didn't know Michael was going to use a quote, but I have a variant of this. The line between good and evil lies in the center of every human heart. It's not an abstraction. You know, I mean, theologians, historians, we talk about good and evil. No, it lies in the center of every heart. And that means that there are times in your life you are going to be called to make those decisions. The story ends on a positive note, which I threatened earlier. Here's the one good thing to come out of Abu Ghraib. Here's little Joe Darby. Comes from the same place in a small town in Pennsylvania. He's the hero. A friend of his showed him a CD with these horrible images, and he looked at them, and he thought they were funny at first. The guy's piling a pyramid. He said, whoever thought of that? It's really ridiculous. And then he kept seeing the worse and worse and worse. There are 1,000 of these images. In fact, even the ones I showed you are not the worst. And he said, this is horrible. This is the wrong thing. We're supposed to be here bringing democracy and freedom. And so he took this CD to an investigative reporter. Remember, he's a private in the military police, in the Army Reserve, and that's such a gutsy thing to do, to go to a senior officer. And he knows what? He knows if his buddies find out, they're going to kill him, right? And he said, I had to do it. He was put in protective custody for 3 years with his mother and his wife because everybody wanted to kill them. Not only the guys in his unit, the people in his hometown. And the people in his hometown were pissed. How could he be a hero? He's a nothing. He's the most ordinary person. He's just like the most average guy in the town, and they're almost envious that he got this hero status. And so in looking at his case, it made me think, you know, I've been focused on bad shit too long. I have to focus on the good things in life. And so I start with the banality of evil, Hannah Arendt, to say, wait a minute, you know, what she's saying is that, you know, there's really two kinds of evil people. There's people whose whole life is organized around evil deeds. Stalin, Mao, Hitler, Idi Amin, and so forth. But they are the exception among evil people. Most people evil are really like Eichmann. They go in and out. You put them in a situation, like these soldiers, you put them in, they do these bad things, like the guards in the Stanford prison. So it's really transient evil. And so the banality of evil is that people really move in and out of situations in which, in those situations, and only there do they act in this way. Well, the counterpoint is what I call the banality of heroism. Again, there are two kinds of heroes. There's the Mother Teresa, there's the Nelson Mandela, there's Gandhi. There are people whose whole life is organized around a principle, around sacrifice, around caring. But they are the exception. Most heroes are heroes of the moment. They're in a particular situation, there's a call to action. When other people are doing nothing, they act. They take an action. And that's what I'm focusing now on. Ordinary people who do extraordinary moral deeds in certain situations. So the same situation that can inflame the hostile imagination in some and lead them to become perpetrators of evil. In other people, it's inspiring the heroic imagination. So the psychology of heroism, about which we know nothing. There is no psychology of heroism. There's no real theory of heroism because everything we know about heroism is we interview people a week, a month, in the case of Christians who hid Jews, 30 years later. We didn't even think to ask the question. And so you have memory distortion because what you really have to understand, what is the heroic decisive moment? What is the moment at which you make a decision to hide a Jewish kid knowing that your kids, if you're caught, your kids will be sacrificed? Well, 30 years later, you say, that was no big deal. I did what I had to do. No, I want to know what is the matrix of decisions that you're going through at that moment. So my argument now is we have to encourage children, family, workers, to develop the heroic imagination. What that means is you have to think of yourself as a hero in waiting. That is, that there's going to be a situation in your life that's going to provide the catalyst for action on the behalf of others or on an ideal. For most of us, most of the time, we're in the middle. That is, we don't get involved, we mind our own business, we do our own thing, and that's safe. And you're going to survive. So maybe that's the evolutionary thing is do nothing, okay? That's what parents tell the kid, don't get involved. You know, mind your own business. For some people in that same, so those are the people guilty of the evil of inaction. That's the big group. For other people in the same situation, and they're going to say, well, I can make some money on this, or, you know, I don't really like those people, or it's going to feel good to kick somebody's ass rather than get my ass kicked. And they moved to be perpetrators of evil. In the same situation, we don't know why, other people look at this like Darby and say, it's wrong, it's immoral, it's illegal, it has to be stopped. So heroes are ordinary people whose social action is extraordinary. They act when other people are passive. So there's only two conditions that are important about heroism. One, you have to take an action. You can't be a hero if you don't act. And it's really moving from passivity, which is the comfort zone, to taking an action. And the second thing is, you got to move from being egocentric. What's it going to cost me? Can I get in trouble? To being sociocentric. That is, I'm going to do something to help somebody else or to help some principle of community. That's all you need to be a hero. Take an action and do something on the behalf of someone else without any sense of gain. Wade Autry, in the New York City subway hero, 75 people on a subway train in him, and he's there with his two daughters, when some guy falls on the track, has a seizure. And 75 people say, wow. And they stand there. And he has his two daughters, which is a good reason not to get involved. Instead, he gives his two daughters to strangers, says, take care of them, and he jumps on the tracks. He pushes this guy off the track, puts him between the two tracks, lays on him as a subway is coming. The guy starts coming to. He says, please, sir, I don't know you, you don't know me, but don't move or else we're both going to die. And the train goes over them and stops. And the first thing he does, he yells up, tell my daughters I'm okay. Because imagine the kid, your father jumps down and the train goes over him. Imagine the trauma. And then, so he saved the guy, and he comes up, and he's interviewed, and they say, oh, you're a real hero. He's on Letterman, he's all over. He said, no, I'm not a hero. I'm just an ordinary person. And he said, I did what anyone could do and what everyone ought to do. That is the model of heroism. So that's what we want to know. How do you instill that mentality? He had never done a heroic deed in his life, and he's probably never going to do one again. Same thing with Joe Dark. But we don't care. We just want a one-time hero, especially if I'm the guy on the tracks.
We will take a few questions. We do want to save time for the book signing. The books are out if you want to pick up your book, and we'll bring them out in a few minutes after we take a few questions to do some signing out there. But why don't we go ahead and take maybe 5 or 10 minutes?
This was supposed to be 50 minutes, but you guys got me crazy. You got me crazed. Yes. You have to stand up and talk loud so they can hear.
All right. Your experiment indicates that you have a certain identification with the aggressors, where you look into people and say, well, maybe they're not all bad. What experiences with violence have you had in your past that would lead you to that kind of...
Good question. I grew up in poverty in the South Bronx ghetto of New York. I grew up around violence. I grew up around friends who were good kids who did horrible things, who went to jail. I had a friend whose father punished him by stripping him naked and having to kneel on rice in a bathtub for an hour at a time. A loving father, caring father. So evil, I mean, essentially it was the way of the world. I mean, it's what most poor people in most ghettos, regardless of color, experience. I mean, it's the worst evil for me was the cops. Okay, the only thing we had was stickballs. A broomstick that somebody stole from their mother, and a Spalding, and we played in the street. This is 1930s. There were no cars. And the cops would come and take a stickball bat, meaning we couldn't play. There was no place. There's no playground for more than a mile. So I never trusted anybody in uniform, even before they said don't trust anybody over 30 in the 70s. I didn't trust them when I was a little kid. Yes, I'm sorry, you had a question.
Your description of Abu Ghraib was beautifully stated. Now, can you look at the administration as it is today and look at that from the same perspective as you do on Abu Ghraib? What are the environmental factors that allow the administration to behave as they do?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really complex question. No, I'm saying, but see, I mean, the issue, okay, all systems are set up to protect their ass. That's the first principle, protect your ass. The second principle is always have a veil of secrecy. That is, you never say what you're doing. Right now, we have no idea what's going on in whatever the local prison is. When I got involved after the experiment, to be honest, when I finished the Stanford Prison Study, August 21st, 1971, I said, it'll probably be a nice article. It might not even get accepted because there's no control group. It's only a demonstration of a principle. That day, so the study ended Friday, I got home on Saturday, I opened the mail, and here's a letter from the attorney of George Jackson, who was a political activist prisoner at San Quentin, who was about to come up for trial. It's called the Soledad Brothers trial. He wrote a book saying, we'd like you to come and give testimony on his behalf about the dehumanizing conditions of prison. I had written about it before. Before I could answer, George Jackson that day was murdered at San Quentin. Okay? It was an escape attempt, murdered, depending on how you think about it. And I became an expert witness for the guy who was trying to escape with him, Johnny Spain, and then got to visit the prison. I went with a congressional subcommittee on the judiciary. It took the congressional subcommittee from the United States Congress 2 weeks before they could have permission to go into San Quentin. They had to get permission from the governor, from the head of Department of Correction, from the warden, etc. And in those 2 weeks, they cleaned up the shit. They cleaned up the blood. You get their prisoners having steak sandwiches, this whole exercise room. They have aromatherapy. I'm saying, so you just take prisons, you say, how could bad things go on? Bad things go on in part because we as citizens who pay for it, our taxes go now, especially in California, the budget for prisons is greater than the budget for the whole University of California. So we're paying for all this stuff. And it's a social experiment that's failed. The recidivism rate is more than 60%. That means in 3 years after somebody gets arrested and released, after somebody gets released, he's back in or she's back in. And the research I've done is in 25% of the cases, the second crime is more severe than the first. So we're paying a huge amount of money. So now they say, well, just leave them in. If we leave them in, there's no recidivism. They never get out. 25. It costs $1 million to keep a person in prison for 25 years. Who's paying that? We're paying that. And so we don't really care. We wish it was different, but we don't want to know. We don't pressure the administration to say, we want to know what's happening in our prison. So, but I'm saying, but all systems have a veil of security. So it's almost impossible to penetrate. They have lawyers who have legal definitions of everything, like enemy non-combatant. We don't torture. There's something called the Military Commissions Act, which George Bush and his legal advisors developed, which was passed by Congress. Every single thing you saw in those pictures is acceptable in the Military Commissions Act because humiliation is not torture. That's a humiliation. Except for the one picture where Grainer is hitting a guy. It's humiliation. Well, they said humiliation doesn't qualify as torture. So that means all of that stuff that you saw that everybody is outraged about, that the military is outraged, is now acceptable because we say we don't torture. And if that doesn't qualify as torture, we don't do that. Yes?
From a Darwinian perspective, what's the use of evil? Is there an upside?
What's the use of evil? It thins population. Genocide thins populations. I don't know if there's an evolutionary use of evil.
Is there a function that's now of no use to us?
Yeah. Said, what is the evolutionary value of evil behavior? And he said, is it simply a carryover for some earlier time? Most evil begins with protecting your territory. That is, I have to feed my family and my kind and kin, and I got food here, and you want to take my stuff, and so we have to fight. So that, and then I don't want to have to fight every year, so it's just easy for me to eliminate you and your kind. Lenny Bruce has this wonderful monologue. I wish I could remember it, but it says, where do laws come from? Where do rules? And it comes from people having property that they want to protect. And suddenly now, people on the other side of the fence start throwing shit in your yard. And you're upset, and you say, don't do it, and they keep doing it. And then, so you throw it back at them, and they throw more on you. They got more people there. And so this starts the police department. So you have to say, you have to go to somebody and say, I don't want somebody throwing shit in my thing. I'm going to pay you to stop them to do it. Okay? Now, the problem is they could pay somebody even more. So then you have to bribe the police to be on your side rather than their side. And he said, and suddenly you get a police state. So I think it has to do with property, with ownership, with in-group versus out-group. And I think in the bottom for evolutionary, that's survival. I mean, what do I have to do for me to survive and my family to survive? And at some point, the more narrow, the more selfish it is, it's never, and therefore, would it be better for me to oppose other people or to say, let's join together and let's survive together rather than I want to survive at your expense? Yes, sir. Oh, after next. Yes, ma'am. Oh, okay. I can't tell. Yeah, both. Oh,
you seem to have approached this from one side, but didn't take a look at the other side of the coin, which is originally what Abu Ghraib was. It was a prison that Saddam Hussein's regime used.
right.
The prisoners in that prison were known to be sadistic and very evil.
The prisoners?
Yes, the prisoners.
Somewhere. Somewhere.
The majority. Okay?
You don't know that. You don't know that. No, once you... No, but you can't use statistics. You can say they were or somewhere. Once you say the majority, then I have to... Great. Okay.
Okay, well, it doesn't matter. So,
It does matter.
my question
It
to
does
you
matter.
is,
Bet it does.
those guards who knew that they were, it was like your experiment in Stanford where they said prisoner 8612 is a bad guy, prisoner 8612 did bad things.
Right.
They had, first of all, they probably had that. Second of all, they knew what some of those prisoners did. They knew what the sons of Saddam Hussein who died in Kusai, the horrible mutilations that they did to the Olympic players. So, and I'm not condoning what was done by any means at the prison, not at all. But what they did, compared to what the regime did, is nothing. It's like playing a sandbox. Excuse me, this is a free country and I have the right to
Go ahead, Phil. Give us a... That's it? No, that's it.
No, that's a question.
That's a good question. Go ahead.
No, wait. So, I mean, this is really good because I'm going to be on Fox Network and they're going to ask the same question. No, I'm serious. No, I'm really serious. The big problem in all of this is situational ethics. So the first thing is, well, that means what you're calling them good American soldiers did, that's fun and games at Lindy Egg compared to hanging 4 contractors from a bridge and cutting people's heads off. And Saddam Hussein had weekly executions. They'd execute whole families. Isn't that worse? I'm saying, yeah, but it's not worse. It's this, what you saw was immoral, was illegal, was wrong. The fact that something is worse wrong, it's not a scale. It's not a scale of how wrong things are. The question is, I want to prevent both of them from happening. The one thing which you're wrong is that the soldiers who were policing Abu Ghraib, Tier 1A, all the people they were interrogating, all the people they were dealing with were people who were arrested in recent times who they thought had information about first Al-Qaeda and then the insurgency. These were the people in there, the 1,000 men, these were not rapists, criminals, and so forth. These were picked up in sweeps of the town. They'd pick whole families up. And the big problem that interrogators told me was that they had no information. You see, so the terrible frustration is General Miller and General Sanchez are saying, we got to get information. The Pentagon is on our butt. We got to get actionable information. But they're arresting 1,000 people who had no information, or if you're arrested, 1 week later, your information is cold. That if you knew something, a week later, the insurgency is changing every day. Today, they're blowing up a chlorine truck. Today, and also, they didn't have enough people who were interrogators who knew Arabic. So they had all these people stuck there. They're telling the military police, soften them up so we can get some information. They're beating them up. They're doing all these things. And they're still getting no information. One of the interrogators who I cite at length, a guy named Tony Lagrenas, who said, I did these terrible things. He was not in Abu Ghraib. He was some other place. He said, I did these terrible things. I finally quit because I couldn't stand myself. He said, at best, 2% of all the people we arrested had any information. But we didn't know which of those 2% and which of the 98%. The program 24, which glorifies torture, has the fallacy of the ticking bomb. That is, you arrest somebody and you know that he has planted a nuclear bomb somewhere in New York, and you got 24 hours to get him to say that, to reveal it. So yeah, we're going to cut off his fingers and cut off his lips and kill his children. We're going to do anything to get information. You never have that information. You begin with total uncertainty. There may be a bomb somewhere. This guy may or may not have anything to do with it. He was living in the building in which somebody found a bomb. So the ticking bomb scenario is always used by people who want to defend torture. I studied torture in Brazil 7 years ago. I went to Brazil because from the 60s through the 70s, Brazil was one of these military juntas, fascists. And they would, socialists and communists, mostly college professors and students, they thought were social. They would bring them in for interrogation, or if they thought they had information, or if they didn't have information or they knew they were bad, they just killed them, put them on airplanes, dumped them. So we interviewed 31 guys who had been, these were all policemen. The policemen were the torturers and the trained torturers. We interviewed them in a local prison which is filled only with policemen. And again, the interesting thing, we want to say, who are these monsters? I mean, torture for me is worse than killing. I mean, killing, you shoot somebody, it's nothing personal. It's a mafia thing. You get out of the way. But to be a torturer, you really have to be a perverted psychologist. Because what you have to do is you have to understand somebody's vulnerability. If you use the wrong kind of torture or too intense and the guy dies, you don't get the confession and you're in trouble with your boss. If you use the wrong kind of torture or you're too soft, you don't get the confession. So you really have to understand somebody's vulnerability, somebody's weaknesses. And all good torturers, all good interrogators know you have to build rapport. You don't beat up somebody. They say whatever you want. So it's who should have trained the interrogators in Iraq is detectives in police stations in LA, in New York, because they know. You read these books by Imbaugh and Reed, Principles of Detective Interrogation. Principle 1, you got to develop rapport. You got to get the person to think of you as a Dutch uncle. You got to get the person to think of you as, like a substitute brother. And you find his weakness. You don't bring him in, have the dogs biting his ass, and have people punching him, putting him in pyramids and stuff. You're never going to get information. So the basic point is that it's so easy to simplify all of this. It's ugly. It's evil. The stuff Saddam Hussein did was horrible, was horrendous. It doesn't justify the horrendous thing we're doing. I mean, it's just replacing a terrible evil with a lesser but evil. I'm sorry, you had...
There seems to be something called national character. When the Nazis marched from country to country, Lithuania was one of the worst. They were helping the Nazis shoot the Jews in the streets. But Denmark was a shining exception. And what they did is they were hiding Jews in their homes. They were shipping them at night in fishing boats to neutral Sweden. And when and most Jews in Denmark survived. And when they were asked, why did you take all these risks? They said it was a matter of plain decency.
Okay. So she's saying, maybe there's something about national character. When the Nazis were going through during their horrendous thing, most countries they went into allied with them, did the same thing. And Denmark is a shining example of a country that didn't, that organized elaborate systems of escape for Jews. Well, again, I don't know research that says, well, let's understand the Danish character. Let's import that along with the cheese.
So do you think that the environment or the barrel is an excuse?
Say it again.
I'm saying, do you think the environment is an excuse? Do you think that this soldier got an unfair trial? Do you think that it was unfair to trial Eichmann and other Nazi people who did really bad things in the war? Do you think it's a good excuse for them?
No. Okay, good. Good question. I say in the book over and over again, understanding is not excusing. That by trying to understand the causes of any behavior, it puts us in a position to begin to change the conditions that produce the behavior. It doesn't excuse it. If it's evil, if it's immoral, if it's illegal, then people are guilty. Chip Frederick said, I'm guilty. He's ready to go to prison. He said, I'm guilty. He said, I don't know why. Most people are influenced by situations. They can't say, well, I did it. I was playing the role. He didn't know why he did what he did, and he knew it was wrong. He knew it was wrong immediately. So he's not saying, hey, I want a plea bargain. So to understand is not excusiology. Psychologists often get accused. When I was president of the American Psychological Association, I used to go to committee meetings in Washington. There was, psychology, it's everything excusiology. It's all, it's all your mother. It's all in the system. It's, where is the personal responsibility? There is always personal responsibility. But what I try to say early in the talk is that we have embraced a kind of medical model where everything is in the person. Pathology is in the person. Legal model is guilt and innocence is in the person. Psychiatry, mental impairment, is in the person. I want to adopt a public health model which says when a flu is going around, yeah, I want to treat the individuals, but I will never prevent the next one from getting it unless I try to figure out what's the cause. Okay? Same thing if there's cholera. Same thing if there's any pollution. Same thing if there's AIDS. You cannot focus always on the individual. You have to say, what is the vector of disease? And it could be a physical disease, or evil is a disease. What is the vector of disease, and where can we intervene? Where can we stop? It's not easy. You know it's easy? It's easy to say, that person is guilty. The same way in the Inquisition. What was the Inquisition about? Inquisition was about people saying, Christian theologians, Jacob Springer and I forget the other, in 1486 saying, why does evil exist in the world? Evil exists in the world because the devil sleeps with women who are witches. And if we just identify the witches and kill them, you break the link between the devil and people. And so the Inquisition started out as a way to reduce evil and spread the worst evil the world has known. Millions of people were killed in all Catholic countries with the good intention of ridding the world of evil. And so I'm saying, so the key there is to say, in any situation, each situation is different, is, let's take the thing I talked about, bullying. I see bullying as a terrible evil for kids. I studied shyness. There are kids, who are slightly shy and they are a victim of bullying and they get destroyed. Well, so what do? Do we get the kid who's a bully and we punish him, ridicule him? No, bullying is perpetrated by a system. How come teachers don't know? How come other kids don't talk to him? How come the parents of bullies are not involved? So essentially, if you want to change some kind of behavior, you have to say, how does it operate within some setting? And what is the system that has the power to change it? And why is it not changing it? So I'm saying, but that doesn't mean, I accept the bully, I accept bullying. I'm against it. I think it's wrong. It's terrible. But I know if we take every bully and punish him, kick him out of school, it doesn't change bullying, because bullying is a process of some people having to dominate other people in various ways, physically or psychologically. One or two more. Yes, you can.
One of the aspects I think that we haven't discussed yet is the role of the media in perpetrating evil.
Oh, God.
I've been teaching about your study in my psychology courses for over a decade now. One of the things that I notice is that my students seem, with each cohort that comes in, to get less and less shocked by your study.
Oh, yeah.
And it concerns me when we have things like South Park teaching people to redefine the word gay as something negative, when we have game shows in which the ugliest person gets plastic surgery, where people are eating bugs for our entertainment, that we might be becoming desensitized to violence and evil. So I wondered if you had anything to say about that.
It's good. Okay. There is a kind of psychic numbing that you watch Survivor, you watch The Apprentice. I mean, again, when I say Trump, one of the reasons I hate him is at some, not seriously, hate what he represents, is here his thing is to humiliate people. On The Idol, the British guy, his job is to humiliate people. And he gets paid a huge amount of money to humiliate people. Well, I think humiliating anybody, but it makes for entertaining because it's shock value. You don't expect people to say, God, you're really terrible. That's the worst voice I ever heard. You should be auto car mechanic. People say, wow, that's really great, that's really interesting. I wish I could do that. That's the power thing of evil. Think, gee, here's somebody doing something I really secretly would like to do. But yeah, we become immune to human abuses. I mean, my sense is that a huge percentage of Americans would do anything to get on television, not for 15 minutes of fame, for 2 minutes. Anything. I can't imagine a limit. Maybe killing your mother, but beating the hell out of her, it's okay. I mean, it's so important to have some identity, some sense that I'm not insignificant, and that's really, it's really basic. I mean, nobody wants to be insignificant, and therefore you can be manipulated to say, oh, on a Jerry Springer show, these other people, where people come on and say, a woman says, I'm sleeping with my daughter's husband. And the daughter is there, what? And they're announcing it publicly to the world. I mean, it's horrendous that you're doing it. It's more horrendous that you're willing to say this to shock your daughter and shock the world. And why would you do it? Well, they're giving you money, but it's a moment of fame. Andy Warhol was wrong about 15 minutes. People take 30 seconds worth. Yeah.
Or, and don't forget the back.
Yeah.
Phil, don't
Okay,
forget the back.
Yeah, here and then way in the back. Yes, this young lady.
You didn't explore, you didn't mention, were any of the individuals on marijuana or alcohol or mind-altering drugs in the 70s as well as in the Iraq?
It had nothing to do like Vietnam. I mean, Vietnam, everybody survived on drugs. I mean, in that jungle, it's just clear. Everybody is living. There's really not any evidence certainly within these, so there's no evidence or any of the reports that some of this behavior was produced because they were drunk or on drugs. I'm even surprised at the question, because I never even thought about this. In none of the reports that I read is there ever a mention of taking drugs. Again, it would be hard to get him in. These people, this guy's living there. He's never out of this prison. I have a sense that drug use and alcohol was really limited by the military. That is, it certainly was nothing like in Vietnam, where it was just rampant. So my sense is that's for me, that's not one of the causative factors, drugs and alcohol, where it is in lots of other things. I mean, drugs and alcohol make you lose your inhibitions and make you do what other people are doing in that setting. Somebody way in the back. Yes, ma'am. And then the gentleman in the maroon.
I was interested in your focus on heroism, and our system of government and constitution is based on political theories that push heroism, fairness, and things like that, and that hasn't led to the kind of personal responsibility that your studies show are lacking. So is there any discussion among your political theorists, scientists, colleagues about what's going on with that?
Yeah, in the chapter I wrote, there's a whole big new taxonomy of 12 different kinds of heroes with examples. One of the keys are whistleblowers. In our society, whistleblowers get punished, okay, usually, rather than be acknowledged, be rewarded. And there's always a sense, well, they're in it for some gain. I mean, they're blowing the whistle and they're getting something from it. I mean, Joe Darby not only got nothing, he almost got killed. He finally, by the way, got a Medal of Honor at the Kennedy Center when he got out of hiding. But even there, for example, Joe Darby was seen as the messenger who embarrassed the military and the Bush administration. Why do I say that? When I heard that he was in hiding, I'd given a talk at the American Psychological Association 3 years ago in Hawaii, and I said, he's really a hero in hiding. And given his low status, he's getting the lowest pay, he's there for 3 years, longer than his tour of duty. It really would be nice to start a Joe Darby Hero Fund that people contributed. When he got out, we give him this money, respect. And there was a reporter in the audience, Marilyn Elias from USA Today, came up and said, that's a great idea. All we need, I'll write a story about it, we just need a place where people could send money. I said, sure, I'll do it. I spent 6 months. I could not get Amnesty International to agree to do it. I could not get the Center for Torture Victims. I could not get my Union Bank in Palo Alto, where I've been banking for 30 years. And I couldn't get the bank in Joe Darby's hometown to be the conduit. People would send money there, and they could take a management fee, and they hold it. And when he gets out, they give it to him. No one wanted to touch it because it was, quote, too political. And you're talking about Amnesty International, torture victims, banks. And so my sense was, so I gave up the idea, but it would have been nice in the sense that here he did something, moral. Yeah, it embarrassed the military, not because he showed the pictures, it's what these guys did, but he was a messenger of the evil. And for me, that was a sad commentary on my country. Last question, then we have to go. Yes, sir. He's first. He's been, okay. Okay, but we'll do both quickly, short ones.
I just want to say that as a kid, I used to go to revival meetings, and I felt when I left I was saved. Now I'm going to get the same feeling today.
Thank you very much. When he was a kid, he used to go to revival meetings and... Felt like he was saved. What? He said he felt like he was saved. He felt like he was saved, and he felt the same way now. So I won't bless you. I'll give you one of these. Yes, last question.
Is there a correlation between intelligence and the inclination to become evil? So, you would think that a person who's more critically, thinking more critically, or used to think more critically, is less likely to be inclined.
Yeah, but I just showed you NYU college students, being seduced like this. I just showed you the kids in the Stanford prison study were not Stanford students. Only 2 were. We did this study in the summer after summer school was over at Stanford and Berkeley. And so these were kids from all over the United States and Canada. So I'm saying, here's intelligent. We didn't give them that intelligent test. These are intelligent kids. One was a graduate student in sociology. Intelligence figures in the extent to which they can practice creative evil. Thank you very much.